Legends of Runeterra is widely praised for its contributions to the broader League mythos, fleshing out the world and giving the spotlight to characters that are otherwise neglected or forgotten about. While some champions are popular enough to warrant multiple appearances across Riot's various projects, others are sadly left in the dust with outdated designs or next to no story progression. The card game has picked up a lot of that slack over the years, but it adapts some champions more gracefully than others. Welcome to Runeterra Rankings, where I attempt to break down how every League champion has been adapted into the trading card game and rank them based on the following criteria: gameplay, art, and story. I'll be giving each category its own individual letter score with a final ranking at the very end. With all that out of the way, let us begin, shall we? Teemo is perhaps one of the most infamous champions in League's roster. For years, the player base memed about him being the game's equivalent to the actual devil for how obnoxious he was to play against. Though an argument could be made that he's long since been outclassed in that department. Regardless, the memes of Teemo being evil incarnate disguised as a cute, fluffy critter have long since become a staple of the character's gameplay and even his lore to an extent. So, how do they handle adapting that into LOR? Let's take a look. Ask any League player why Teemo is considered so obnoxious to play against, and they're bound to tell you that the primary factor would be his mushrooms, or puff caps as they're officially known. Teemo's signature move allows him to scatter these lethal fungi all over the map, and they are completely invisible to his enemies. Puff caps act as poisonous landmines when stepped on, dealing huge damage when they explode and additional damage to enemies from, well, the poison. Obviously, if Riot was going to adapt Teemo into the card game, they were going to bring his dreaded puff caps along with him. In LOR, Teemo has the ability to plant his mushrooms not on the field, but on random cards in the enemy deck. When a card with a mushroom attached to it is drawn, it explodes and deals damage to the enemy nexus. It is possible to plant multiple mushrooms on a single card, dealing additional damage. In short, these puff caps operate much like they do in League. Invisible traps that explode and deal poison damage, growing increasingly more obnoxious the more are added into the deck. Your opponent's own cards become a liability, and drawing becomes a risky action every time they do it. Teemo himself has the elusive keyword, which fits his ability to go invisible in League, and plants 5 puff caps in the enemy deck every time he strikes the enemy nexus. Once you planted 15 or more, Teemo levels up. At that point, every nexus strike doubles the number of puff caps in his enemy's deck. Basically, playing against Teemo in LOR can potentially feel just as annoying as playing against him in League. The puff caps are his bread and butter, as well as the bane of his enemies. Irritating as it is, though, it's also about as faithful as one could hope for from an adaptation of Teemo. As such, Teemo's gameplay gets an S. When Teemo first launched, he didn't exactly have a real narrative to speak of. After the Bandlewood update, though, that has changed significantly. Teemo's story now revolves around him training a bunch of new Bandle Scout recruits on an expedition into the Fey Wilderness. Interestingly, most of this story actually seems to happen prior to Teemo's card. A lot of shenanigans happen over the course of the scouting trip as shown by his followers. Though Teemo's level 1 shows him standing proudly atop a mushroom as everyone around him cheers, seemingly glad to have been left safely back to Bandle City. Even the introverts who weren't thrilled to be here now seem to be celebrating in the background. Of course, things have to take one final turn for the chaotic in Teemo's level 2. Evidently, Teemo was standing on another puff cap, which promptly explodes into a cloud of poisonous spores. Everyone scatters in a panic, while Teemo nonchalantly leaps up into the air, propelled by the blast. It's got a real to-be-continued energy, like the ending to an episode of a cartoon. Everyone else is panicked and frightened, but Teemo just thinks that this is another day in the field. As a whole, Teemo's LOR story is nothing super captivating, but it absolutely fits his character. Obviously, you need to check out plenty of his followers and spells to get the whole story of the expedition, but even without them, Teemo's art alone gives a clear enough picture of what's happening if you know his character. Teemo's story gets an A. Teemo, like Fizz, had his art radically overhauled in the Bandlewood expansion. Prior to that, his level 1 depicted him harvesting, or perhaps planting puff caps somewhere in a jungle-like area. His level 2 showed him merrily strolling along after one explodes behind him for whatever reason. While there was nothing necessarily wrong with the composition of either image, something about Teemo's anatomy in these scenes always bugged me. Like, am I the only one who feels as though his head is slightly too big for his body? The post-Bandle art rectifies this, however. Teemo's new level 1 gives a better overall shot of his body and even shows off his surroundings better to tell the audience where the scene is taking place, Bandle City. He's surrounded by other Yordles and also this grape ferryman, but remains the literal center of attention thanks to his positioning. The level 2 art continues this trend, highlighting Teemo by putting him not just center frame, but also above everyone else. His never-ceasing smile indicates that he remains unbothered by something that sends the rest of the group into clear distress, as though he considers the last-minute excitement just another part of the adventure, as discussed before. No major alterations are made to Teemo's league design, but that's honestly fine. It's a faithful adaptation of what we have, and what we have works. As a whole, I'm giving Teemo's art an A. Teemo is not a character that I have particularly strong feelings about, but his LOR incarnation is really solid in my opinion. Wright perfectly encapsulated his puff cap gimmick. His scouting adventure is a fun little romp through the wilds of Bandle, and the new artwork for his cards is definitely an improvement over the original. The only real gripe I have with Teemo and LOR is making him a part of Zontover, as I feel pure Bandle would have fit him more thematically, but that's a whole other discussion unto itself. And he did come out before the Bandle City update. Despite that, my final ranking for Teemo in LOR is an S.